There are moments in a man's life when he realizes retirement was only temporary. I believed mine had finally arrived. 27 years chasing violent fugitives. 27 years learning how dangerous men think. 27 years watching fear, greed, and anger destroy lives. When I retired, I made myself one promise: no more violence, no more criminals, no more midnight phone calls. I bought a small farmhouse outside Helena, Montana. The mornings belonged to coffee. The afternoons belonged to my vegetable garden. The evenings belonged to silence. It wasn't exciting. It wasn't glamorous. It was exactly the life I'd spent 3 decades earning. I thought the hardest days were behind me. I was wrong. Because at exactly 2:14 on a rainy Thursday morning, my phone rang. The screen showed one name: Emily, my daughter. She almost never called after 10. When I answered, I didn't hear words. I heard breathing, shaking, trying not to cry. Finally, she whispered 4 words. "Dad." I finally left. Everything inside me became perfectly calm. Fear is loud. Training is silent. I asked only one question: "Where are you?" She gave me the name of an old gas station nearly 40 miles away. I said, "Lock the doors. Stay inside. I'm coming." 45 minutes later, my daughter climbed into my truck, carrying nothing except a black garbage bag filled with clothes. 3 days later, the man she had escaped came looking for me. He believed he was threatening an old retired farmer. He had no idea. He had just knocked on the wrong door. Chapter 1. The Life I Chose. My name is Raymond Caldwell. I'm 68 years old. Most people in my town know me as the quiet old man who grows tomatoes. They wave when I drive past. The lady at the grocery store always reminds me to buy strawberries because she knows I forget. Every Sunday, I sit in exactly the same pew at church. Nobody asks many questions. That's how I like it. Peace is a strange thing. People think peace is something exciting. It isn't. Peace is routine. Coffee before sunrise, checking the weather, fixing broken fences, listening to birds instead of sirens. For the first time in decades, I slept through the night. Or at least, I used to. Emily always laughed at how boring my life had become. "Dad," she'd tease, "you used to chase bad guys. Now you argue with squirrels over tomatoes." She wasn't wrong. I'd gladly lose every tomato if it meant never seeing another family destroyed by violence. Some memories never leave you. They simply learn to stay quiet. Emily was 34, bright, kind, funny, the kind of little girl who apologized to trees after climbing them. After her mother passed away 12 years earlier, it had always been the two of us. Not perfect, but close, very close. She used to call every Sunday evening, even after college, even after getting her own apartment, even after starting her marketing job in Billings. We never missed a Sunday. Until Derek. The calls slowly became shorter, then less frequent. Then they stopped altogether. At first, I blamed adulthood. People get busy. Life moves quickly. That's normal. But something didn't feel normal. A father notices things, not because he's suspicious, because love pays attention. The first time I met Derek Lawson, he smiled before speaking. Salesman smile, perfect teeth, expensive watch, confident handshake. Strong enough to impress, just weak enough to avoid looking aggressive. "I've heard a lot about you, Mr. Caldwell." Most people would have liked him immediately. I almost did. Almost. Experience teaches you something strange. Danger rarely introduces itself with anger. Real predators usually arrive smiling. Emily couldn't stop talking about him. He owns his own construction company. He works so hard. Everyone respects him. He says I'm the best thing that's ever happened to him. I smiled, because fathers are supposed to smile, but I watched. Always watched. Not him, her. She laughed less. interrupted herself more often, looked at him before answering simple questions. Tiny things, things nobody else noticed. People reveal the truth between words. At dinner one evening, Emily reached for another bread roll. Derek laughed. Careful, wedding dress. Everyone else chuckled politely. Emily quietly put the bread back. She smiled, but it wasn't a real smile. It was permission. Permission he'd trained her to ask for, without saying a word. That bothered me more than if they'd argued. Months passed. She visited less, stopped wearing bright colors, stopped talking about work, stopped making jokes. She looked tired, not physically, emotionally, like someone constantly measuring every sentence before speaking. I've seen that look before, too many times, not in my family, in witnesses, victims, people living with someone they feared disappointing. I prayed I was wrong. I wanted to be wrong, more than anything. One afternoon she arrived alone. She hugged me longer than usual. I noticed a faint bruise near her wrist, small, easy to hide beneath a bracelet. I pretended not to notice, not because I missed it, because frightened people tell the truth only after they believe they're safe. Before leaving, she stopped at the front door, turned around, opened her mouth, then smiled. I love you, Dad. I love you too. She nodded, walked outside, and drove away. I stood on the porch, long after her car disappeared. Something was wrong. I didn't know what. Yet. 3 weeks passed. Emily didn't call. Not once. I told myself she was busy. People in love disappear for a while. That's normal. At least, that's what fathers tell themselves when the truth hurts too much. On a cold Tuesday afternoon, my phone finally rang. Emily, I answered before the first ring finished. Hey, kiddo. Silence. Then, Dad, are you busy? No, I was just wondering. Her voice hesitated. If you still had Mom's old blue quilt, the one she made when I was little. I smiled. Of course. I've kept it. Another long pause. Could I maybe borrow it sometime? Anytime you want. Thanks. She hung up. The entire conversation lasted less than a minute. But something stayed with me. Emily never called things by the wrong name. She wasn't asking for a quilt. She was asking if she still had somewhere safe to come home to. That night, I couldn't sleep. I walked into the garage. In the far corner sat an old steel cabinet, locked. Dust covered the top. It hadn't been opened in nearly 6 years. I looked at it for several seconds, then walked away. No, that part of my life was over, or so I believed. The following Sunday, church ended just after 11. As I greeted people outside, I noticed Emily's car parked across the street. She wasn't inside. She was sitting behind the steering wheel, engine off, looking straight ahead. I walked over. She forced a smile. Surprise. You should have come inside. I didn't feel like it. That wasn't like her. Not at all. We drove to a nearby diner, the same diner she'd loved since she was 8 years old. She ordered coffee. Nothing else. Years ago, she would have ordered pancakes before even opening the menu. Little changes. They always matter. Halfway through the meal, her phone vibrated. She glanced at the screen. Her entire posture changed. Shoulders tightened, eyes lowered. She immediately typed back, then apologized. I'm sorry. Derek worries if I don't answer. I nodded. Does he? She smiled nervously. You know how relationships are. No, healthy relationships aren't like that. But I didn't say it. Not yet. Instead, I asked a different question. When's the last time you laughed? She blinked. What? A real laugh. The kind your mother used to complain could be heard across the house. She stared into her coffee. I don't know. That answer broke something inside me. Before leaving, I hugged her. She felt lighter, not healthier, lighter, as though stress had been eating away at her one day at a time. When she climbed back into her car, I noticed Derek's pickup parked 2 rows away, engine running. He hadn't come inside. He'd waited, watching. That evening, I wrote something on a yellow legal pad, not because I planned to interfere, because habits are difficult to kill. Date, time, location, observed behavior, nothing more, just notes, old instincts. Over the next month, the pattern repeated. Emily cancelled Sunday calls, missed birthdays, skipped family dinners. Whenever we spoke, she sounded tired, always tired. Yet every social media photo showed something different. Perfect smiles, weekend trips, fancy restaurants, matching outfits. The internet loved their relationship. Reality usually hides behind the best photographs. One rainy evening, my neighbor, Frank, stopped by. He'd spent 30 years as a volunteer firefighter. Good man, good instincts. He leaned against my fence and asked, "Everything all right with your daughter?" I looked up. "What makes you ask?" "I saw her at the grocery store yesterday." He hesitated. She looked scared. That made two people who noticed, which meant it wasn't my imagination anymore. A week later, Emily finally came home, not to visit, to hide. She knocked just before sunset, holding nothing, wearing sunglasses, inside the house. At sunset, I opened the door. She immediately looked over her shoulder. "Can I come in?" I stepped aside. She entered. I locked the door behind her. For nearly 2 minutes, neither of us spoke. Then, she slowly removed the sunglasses. My heart sank. A fading bruise surrounded her left eye. She quickly looked away. I walked into a cabinet. I quietly nodded, then asked, "Would you like some coffee?" She looked surprised. "You? Believe me?" "No. I believe you're not ready to tell me the truth." Tears immediately filled her eyes. She sat down, covered her face, and cried harder than I'd ever seen. Not loud, not dramatic. The quiet kind. The kind people carry for months before it finally escapes. Nearly 20 minutes passed before she spoke. "It wasn't always like this." "I know. He says it's my fault." I remained silent. "He says I make him angry." Silence again. I keep thinking, if I could just stop making mistakes, he'd become the man I met. I reached across the table, placed my hand over hers. "Emily." She looked up. "The man you met never existed." She cried even harder. For the first time, she wasn't defending him. She was mourning the future she'd believed she was building. And that's much harder. "Dad," she whispered. "I'm scared." I squeezed her hand gently. "I know. He says if I leave, he'll ruin my life." I looked directly into her eyes. "No, he'll try. There's a difference." That night, she stayed in her old bedroom, the same room she'd painted pale blue when she was 14. She slept almost 12 hours, the longest uninterrupted sleep she'd had in months. I knew, because twice during the night, I quietly checked to make sure she was still there. Old habits. Fathers don't retire either. At sunrise, I walked outside with my coffee. The morning was quiet, too quiet. Then I noticed fresh tire tracks. Someone had driven slowly past the house several times during the night. I didn't panic. I simply observed, measured, remembered, because whoever had done it had already made his first mistake. For 11 days, Emily stayed with me. She smiled more. She slept better. She even laughed once, when I accidentally dropped an entire basket of tomatoes, trying to chase a raccoon out of the garden. For a second, she looked like herself again. The little girl who used to laugh so hard she'd snort, then get embarrassed for laughing. It reminded me of her mother. We didn't talk much about Derek, not because we were avoiding it. Because healing isn't a straight line. Sometimes, people need ordinary days before they can survive difficult conversations. So we cooked together, watched old movies, walked around the property. Life became quiet again. At least, for a little while. On the 12th morning, Emily came into the kitchen dressed for work. She looked nervous. "I have to go back." I looked up from my coffee. "Do you?" "My job, my apartment, my life." She hesitated. "I can't hide forever." "No, you can't." Silence settled between us. Then I asked the only question that mattered. "Are you going back because you want to, or because you're afraid not to?" She stared at the floor, long enough for me to know the answer. "I think I owe him one conversation." I nodded slowly. "I understand." She looked relieved that I wasn't arguing. Then I said quietly, "If he raises his voice once, you leave. If he blocks the door, you leave. If he touches you, you leave. No explanations, no second chances, no promises that he'll change. Just leave." She wrapped her arms around me. "I promise." I wanted to believe that promise would protect her. Sometimes, love wants things that reality refuses to give. 3 days passed. Nothing. No calls. No messages. I forced myself not to interfere. She was an adult. She had to make her own choices. Being a father means learning when to stand beside someone instead of standing in front of them. It may be the hardest lesson of all. Then came Thursday. Rain tapped softly against the windows, the kind of cold rain that makes the whole world feel smaller. I had just gone to bed when my phone vibrated. 2:14 a.m. Emily. I answered instantly. Emily. At first, I heard only breathing, fast, uneven, like she'd been running. Then, very quietly, "Dad." I finally left. Those 4 words carried months of fear, months of hope, months of pain. "Where are you?" "I'm at Miller's gas station. I locked myself in the restroom. I think..." Her voice cracked. "I think he followed me." Every muscle in my body became still, not tense, still, the way water becomes still just before it freezes. "Listen carefully." "I'm listening." "Are the doors locked?" "Yes." "Stay inside. Don't answer anyone." "I'm leaving now. I'll be there in 45 minutes." She whispered. "Hurry." The call ended. I grabbed my truck keys, my wallet, a flashlight, nothing else. As I stepped outside, the rain had become heavier. Lightning flashed over the mountains. I climbed into the truck, started the engine, and drove. Not fast, not recklessly, steadily. Experience teaches you something strange. Panicked people crash. Prepared people arrive. Halfway there, my phone rang again. "Unknown number," I answered. Silence. Then, a man's voice. Calm, mocking. "Looking for someone?" I didn't answer. He chuckled. "She always runs back." "They all do." Click. The line went dead. I placed the phone face down beside me. No anger, no threats, no shouting, just information. The voice wasn't emotional. That told me something. Men who enjoy control rarely lose it until someone refuses to obey. Emily had refused. That made her dangerous. To him. 43 minutes later, I pulled into Miller's gas station, nearly empty. One pickup near the pumps. A delivery van. No sign of Derek. I parked directly outside the entrance, walked inside. The young cashier looked exhausted. "I think someone's in your restroom." He nodded. "She's been in there almost an hour. Won't come out." I thanked him, walked to the door, knocked gently. "It's me." Silence. Then, "Dad, I'm here." The lock clicked. The door opened slowly. Emily stepped out carrying nothing, except a black garbage bag filled with clothes. Her eyes were swollen. Mascara streaked down her face. Her hands were shaking so badly she could barely hold the bag. I simply opened my arms. She collapsed against my chest. I thought he was going to find me. Not tonight. We walked outside together. She climbed into the truck, buckled her seatbelt, still trembling. As I started the engine, she looked out the passenger window. "Dad." A black pickup slowly turned into the parking lot. She stopped breathing. "That's him." The truck rolled past us, very slowly. The driver never looked away. Neither did I. Our eyes met, for less than 2 seconds. Then he smiled. Not a friendly smile, a promise. He drove away. Emily whispered, "Please don't follow him." "I won't," and I meant it. Because men like Derek always come back on their own. The drive home was quiet. Halfway there, Emily finally asked, "Are you disappointed in me?" I looked at her. For what? I stayed too long. No. I've spent my whole life meeting people who knew exactly when to leave. They were almost always lying. The hardest part isn't leaving. It's believing you deserve to. She wiped away fresh tears. "I don't know what happens now. You rest. What about Derek? He'll make a choice. And every choice has consequences." When we reached the farmhouse, the porch light was still glowing, exactly as I'd left it. Emily smiled weakly. "You always leave it on." "I know. It helped me find home." She carried the garbage bag upstairs, closed the bedroom door. A few moments later, the house became silent. I stood alone in the kitchen, poured another cup of coffee, looked out the window into the rain. Then, for the first time in 6 years, I walked into the garage, toward the old steel cabinet. I unlocked it. Inside sat a plain black case. No medals, no trophies, no photographs. Just a worn leather badge wallet and a faded credential. I stared at it for a long time, then quietly closed the cabinet again. Not yet. Some parts of a man's past wait until they're needed. The next morning, at exactly 9:17, a black pickup stopped at the end of my driveway. It didn't honk. It didn't move. It simply waited. And I knew the peace I'd spent years building had just come to an end. The black pickup stayed at the end of my driveway for almost 15 minutes. It never moved, never honked, never left. It simply watched. I finished my coffee, closed the curtains, said nothing. Some people mistake silence for fear, others mistake patience for weakness. Both mistakes are expensive. Emily noticed the truck from the kitchen window. Her face turned pale. "He's here." I walked over, looked once, then stepped away. "Yes. Aren't you going to call someone?" "Not yet." She stared at me. "Dad, he's trying to frighten us. If we react exactly the way he expects, he wins." 20 minutes later, the truck drove away. Emily finally breathed again. "I don't understand." "You don't have to. You only have to stay inside." For the next 3 days, the pattern continued. The truck appeared, then disappeared. Sometimes in the morning, sometimes after sunset, sometimes just long enough for Emily to notice. It wasn't violence. It was intimidation, psychological pressure, the kind designed to convince victims they're never truly safe. On the 4th evening, the phone rang. "Unknown number," I answered. "Mr. Caldwell." A calm voice. "I think you have something that belongs to me." "No, I have my daughter." Silence, then laughter. "You really think you can protect her?" "I know I can." His tone hardened. "You don't know who you're dealing with." I replied quietly. "I've heard that sentence before." Click. The call ended. Emily looked at me. "Weren't you scared?" I smiled faintly. "No, I was listening." "For what?" "For his mistakes." That night, after Emily had gone to bed, I sat alone on the porch. The rain had finally stopped. The mountains were silent. An old notebook rested beside my chair. I wrote 4 short lines. Thursday, 9:12 p.m. Threat call received. Voice calm. Subject attempting intimidation. Nothing more. Just facts. Facts matter. Emotions fade. Facts remain. The following afternoon, my neighbor Frank stopped by. He carried 2 bags of apples from his orchard. Then he looked toward the road. "That black pickup again?" I nodded. "You know him?" "No." Frank hesitated. "Want me to stay a while?" I smiled. "Thanks. But today isn't your fight." He squeezed my shoulder. "If that changes, call me." Good neighbors don't ask questions. They simply show up. Emily spent most of the afternoon in the garden. For the first time in weeks, she looked peaceful. She picked tomatoes, watered flowers, even hummed an old song her mother used to sing. Watching her smile again reminded me exactly what was at stake. This wasn't about pride or revenge. It was about giving my daughter her life back. At exactly 6:43 p.m., gravel crunched beneath heavy tires. The black pickup rolled into my driveway. This time, it didn't stop at the road. It came all the way to the porch. The driver's door opened. Derek stepped out. Tall, confident, expensive boots, perfect haircut, the same salesman's smile. Only now, it wasn't convincing anyone. Emily froze. "Oh God." I gently touched her shoulder. "Go inside. I'm not leaving you." "You aren't. You're protecting yourself." She looked at me for several seconds, then nodded, closed the front door behind her. Derek climbed the porch steps slowly, hands in his pockets, smiling. "So, you're the famous father?" I didn't answer. He looked around the property. "Nice place. Shame if something happened to it." Still, I said nothing. Silence unsettles arrogant people. They expect arguments, not patience. Finally, he laughed. "You know, Emily always said you were quiet." I figured she meant weak. He stepped closer. "I'm giving you one chance. Tell her to come home." I looked directly into his eyes. "No." His smile disappeared. "You really think you can stop me?" I answered calmly. "I think you're making decisions you'll regret." He laughed again. "You don't know who I am." I tilted my head slightly. "No, I know exactly what you are." For the first time, his expression changed. Only for a second. But I saw it. People like Derek expect fear. Recognition unsettles them. He took another step. "What does that mean?" "It means I've met men exactly like you. They all believed they were untouchable. They were all wrong." For several seconds, neither of us spoke. The wind moved quietly through the trees. Somewhere in the distance, a dog barked. Then Derek smiled again. "This isn't over." He turned, walked back to his truck, started the engine. Before driving away, he lowered the window. "You should have stayed out of this." "Old man." The truck disappeared in a cloud of dust. Emily rushed outside. "What was that?" I looked toward the empty road. "That was a man who just made another mistake." She frowned. "What mistake?" I looked at her. "He came here because he thinks he's in control." I paused. "He isn't." That night, after Emily fell asleep, I unlocked the steel cabinet once more. This time, I removed the worn leather credential. I placed it on the kitchen table. Beside it, an old photograph. 5 younger men, standing in front of an unmarked government aircraft. One of them was me. I looked at the picture for a long moment, then quietly whispered, "I was hoping I'd never need you again." The next morning, I woke before sunrise. Old habits. Some routines never leave you. Coffee, black, no sugar. I stood on the porch, watching the fog drift across the fields. For a few precious minutes, everything looked peaceful. Then my phone vibrated. Unknown number. Again. I answered. No one spoke. Only breathing. Slow, deliberate, meant to remind me someone was there. I waited. Then quietly said, "If you're trying to frighten me, you're 25 years too late." The line disconnected. Emily found me outside. "You didn't sleep much." I slept enough. She studied my face. "You're not telling me everything." No. Because I don't trust you. I shook my head. Because I trust you too much. She looked confused. The less you know, the safer you are. Around 10 that morning, a county sheriff's cruiser rolled into the driveway. Emily stiffened. Derek? No. This is someone else. Sheriff Daniel Harper stepped out. Late 50s, weathered face. The kind of man who listened more than he talked. He removed his hat. Morning, Mr. Caldwell. Morning, Sheriff. I'd like a word. Emily excused herself. The sheriff waited until she was inside, then lowered his voice. 3 reports came in last night. About the black pickup. He nodded. And 1 report about Derek Lawson. What kind of report? He threatened another witness. I remained silent. The sheriff watched me carefully. Mr. Caldwell, I've been doing this job almost 30 years. I know when someone is scared, and I know when someone isn't. You aren't. No. Why? I looked toward the mountains. Experience. The sheriff smiled slightly. Military? I returned the smallest smile. A long time ago. What branch? I don't talk about it. The sheriff accepted the answer. Interesting. Most people keep asking. Professionals don't. Before leaving, he handed me a business card. If anything happens, call me directly. I nodded. Thank you. Then, almost as an afterthought, he asked, Have we met before? No, I don't think so. He studied my face one last time. You look familiar. I get that a lot. He drove away. Emily came outside. What did he want? To make sure we're safe. Are we? I answered honestly. For today. That afternoon, I drove into town alone. There was one place I hadn't visited in nearly 15 years. A small brick building with faded lettering above the entrance. Harrison Legal Group. The receptionist looked up, then smiled politely. Can I help you? I'm here to see Margaret Harrison. She checked the schedule. I'm sorry, she's very busy. Before I could answer, an older woman stepped into the hallway. She froze. For several long seconds, she simply stared. Then she whispered, Ray? I smiled. It's been a while. She crossed the room and hugged me tightly. Much tighter than lawyers usually hug people. You disappeared. I retired. So I heard. She stepped back. I also heard you promised. Never to need me again. I did. And yet, I nodded. And yet. Inside her office, nothing had changed. Same books, same photographs, same clock. Margaret closed the door. You look older. So do you. She laughed. Fair. Then her expression became serious. How bad is it? I placed a folder on her desk. Photographs, phone records, license plate numbers, dates, times, notes, everything documented. She opened the folder. Her eyebrows slowly lifted. You've been preparing. I always prepare. She looked up. You think this will end in court? I know it will. She leaned back. You've kept records exactly the same way. I didn't answer. She quietly closed the folder. I never asked before, and I won't ask now. But who exactly were you working for? I looked toward the window. People who preferred not to be mentioned. She nodded once. I thought so. When I stood to leave, she said quietly, Ray, I stopped. If this becomes public, your past won't stay buried. I smiled gently. It was never buried. It was simply left behind. As I walked toward my truck, I noticed a black SUV parked across the street. Engine running, windows tinted, watching. Again, I didn't react. I simply drove home. That evening, Emily was making dinner, for the first time in weeks. She laughed. A real laugh, not forced, not frightened. For a moment, she looked like the little girl who used to run through this house barefoot. I hoped Derek had never seen that version of her, because that's who I intended to protect, no matter the cost. At 8:17 p.m., someone knocked. 3 slow knocks, not aggressive, not friendly. I opened the door. A young delivery driver stood there. Package for Raymond Caldwell. I didn't order anything. Signature required. I signed. The driver left. Inside the box was only one object, an old military challenge coin. No note, no return address, just the coin. I turned it over. The engraved eagle, the faded motto, the deep scratch across one side. I knew that scratch. I had made it myself, 28 years earlier. My heartbeat slowed. Only one other person could have sent it. And if he knew where I was, then everything was about to change. I quietly whispered, "So, you finally found me." I turned the coin over, again and again. The metal was worn smooth by time. Most people would have seen an old military keepsake. I saw something else. A message. No words, no letter, no signature. Just one scratched challenge coin. Exactly the way we used to communicate when paper was too dangerous. Emily walked into the kitchen. "Dad?" I closed my hand around the coin. "Everything all right?" "Yes." "You don't look all right." I smiled gently. "I've had worse mornings." She wasn't convinced, but she let it go. After breakfast, I drove 30 miles east. No GPS, no phone, just memory. Some roads you never forget. The destination wasn't marked on any tourist map, just a weathered diner beside an abandoned rail line. The sign simply read, "Harrison's Cafe." It looked forgotten. That was the point. Inside, only 4 customers sat quietly drinking coffee. Nobody spoke. Nobody stared. The waitress looked at me, then froze. Her eyes widened. "It's been a long time." "Mr. Caldwell?" I smiled politely. "It has." She nodded once. "The back booth is ready." I never asked for a booth. She never asked why I came. 5 minutes later, an elderly man entered. White beard, baseball cap, simple flannel shirt. Anyone passing by would have assumed he was another retired farmer. He sat across from me. Neither of us spoke. He looked at the coin, then looked at me. "You kept it." "I always do." He smiled. "I wondered if you'd recognize it." "I recognized the scratch." "You remembered." "I remember everything." The waitress quietly placed 2 coffees on the table. Neither of us had ordered. She simply knew. The old man finally leaned forward. "They found you." "I know." "How much do they know?" "Not enough. Yet." He looked toward the window. "The people following you, they're professionals." "No," I replied. "They're pretending to be. Real professionals don't make themselves visible." The old man laughed softly. "Still teaching. Old habits." Emily had asked me once why I never talked about my military years. The truth wasn't complicated. Some stories aren't yours alone. Some names stay buried because other people are still alive. Honor sometimes sounds exactly like silence. The old man reached into his jacket. He placed a folded photograph on the table. I unfolded it slowly. 6 young men, standing beside a transport aircraft, every one of them smiling. Only 2 were still alive. He pointed to the youngest officer. "You remember him?" "I could never forget. He made Chief Justice." I raised an eyebrow. "So that's where life took him. He still asks about you." I looked away. I hope he stopped. He never did. The old man lowered his voice. "Ray, if this case reaches court, he may see your name." I took another sip of coffee. "Then he'll see it." Outside, a black SUV rolled slowly past the cafe. The old man noticed it immediately. "They're watching." "Yes." "You want me to make a call?" "No." "You sure?" "I've already made mine." He frowned. "When?" "Yesterday." "To who?" I smiled. "The only person who still answers." For several seconds, the old man simply stared at me. Then he laughed. "My God, you actually did it." Back at the farmhouse, Emily was repairing the old porch swing. She looked happier than she'd been in months. Watching her smile made every risk worthwhile. "Dad, yes?" I forgot what peace felt like. I looked at her quietly. "Then let's keep it that way." That evening, the sheriff returned. This time, he wasn't alone. A state investigator stepped out beside him. Professional. Sharp suit, quiet eyes. The investigator introduced himself. "Mr. Caldwell, I'm Special Investigator Daniel Brooks. I'd like to ask you a few questions. About Derek Lawson." "Yes." I invited them inside. The interview lasted nearly an hour. Most of the questions were routine. Dates, phone calls, threats, vehicles, witnesses. Then, Brooks asked something unexpected. "Have you ever testified in federal court?" The room became silent. Emily looked at me. I looked at Brooks. "Why do you ask?" He slid a folder across the table. Inside was an old government record. My name redacted. Almost every line blacked out, except one. Raymond A. Caldwell Brooks looked at me carefully. "I've never seen a file like this." I wasn't supposed to. Emily stared at the page. "Dad, what is this?" I slowly closed the folder. "History." "That's not an answer." "No, it's the only one I can give." Brooks stood. "We'll probably need you in court." I nodded once. "I'll be there." As he reached the door, he turned back. "There was one more thing. This afternoon, someone from Washington called our office." Sheriff Harper looked surprised. "They specifically asked whether Raymond Caldwell had agreed to testify." Emily frowned. "Washington?" Brooks nodded. "I've never seen anything like it." He looked directly at me. "Who exactly are you?" "Mr. Caldwell." I smiled politely. "I'm Emily's father. Nothing more, nothing less." After they left, Emily sat across from me. For almost a minute, she said nothing. Finally, she whispered, "I don't know who you are anymore." I reached across the table and gently took her hand. "You know exactly who I am. I'm still the man who tucked you into bed every night, who taught you to ride a bicycle, who cried the day your mother died." She squeezed my hand. "But there's more. Yes, there always has been." That night, I unlocked the old wooden chest one final time. Inside, beneath decades of photographs, lay a neatly pressed dress uniform. Its insignia had been covered carefully with plain cloth years ago. I brushed away the dust. Tomorrow, for the first time in nearly 3 decades, I would wear it again. Not because I wanted recognition, because the truth had finally caught up with me. The next morning, I stood in front of the bedroom mirror. The old dress uniform rested across the chair, perfectly pressed, untouched. For 28 years, I ran my fingers across the fabric. Memory has a strange way of speaking. Sometimes it doesn't use words, it uses weight. The weight of decisions, the weight of names, the weight of people who never came home. I quietly folded the uniform again. Not today, not yet. Emily knocked softly. "Dad?" "Come in." She stepped inside, carrying coffee. "I made it the way Mom used to." I smiled. "You remembered?" "I remember more than you think." She hesitated. "Can I ask you something?" "You always can." She sat beside me. "Were you ever Special Forces?" I chuckled. "Everyone asks that." "And?" "I was exactly what my records say. A Marine." "Yes." "Nothing more?" I looked into my coffee. "Sometimes. The truth isn't the whole answer." She wanted to ask again. Instead, she nodded. "I'll wait." "For what?" "For the day you're ready." That afternoon, Derek made his move. Emily received a legal notice. Emergency custody petition, property dispute, financial misconduct. 3 separate allegations, all false, every one of them. Emily's hands trembled as she read. "He wants everything." "He doesn't want the house," I said quietly. "He wants control." An hour later, My attorney, Margaret Harrison, arrived. She spread the documents across the dining table. This wasn't written by Derek. No, it was written by someone expensive. She looked directly at me. They're expecting you to panic. I smiled. They'll be disappointed. Margaret removed another folder. I've already checked every filing. She paused. Something doesn't make sense. What? The opposing counsel. She slid a business card toward me. One name, one law firm. I stared at it for several seconds. Margaret noticed. You know them. I know someone there. 20 years earlier, that firm had represented a defense contractor, a contractor connected to an operation that officially never happened. The coincidence was impossible. Someone was digging into my past. That evening, the phone rang. Blocked number. I answered. A calm male voice spoke. Mr. Caldwell, I'd like to save everyone some trouble. I'm listening. Tell your daughter to withdraw the case. No. Then things will become unpleasant. They already have. A brief silence. Then the stranger asked, Do you still keep the uniform? My heartbeat slowed. Not because I was afraid, because very few people even knew it existed. Who is this? The caller ignored the question. Some ghosts are safer left buried. The line went dead. Emily had heard enough to know it wasn't ordinary. She stood in the hallway. Dad, they know about the uniform. Yes. How? I intend to find out. That night, I drove alone, not to town, not to the sheriff, to the old Veterans Memorial outside the city. It was nearly midnight, empty, quiet, names carved into black granite. I stopped before one particular wall. 37 names, 37 men, every one of them officially listed as casualties. I quietly placed my hand against the stone. I'm sorry. I couldn't bring all of you home. Behind me, a voice answered. You brought back everyone you could. I turned. An elderly man stood beneath the flagpole. Walking cane, Marine Corps cap, silver hair. He saluted. Not casually, properly. I returned it. You shouldn't be here, General. He smiled. And neither should you. For several moments, neither of us spoke. Finally, he said, I heard their reopening questions. So did I. They'll come after your record. They're welcome to try. They won't understand it. They never did. The general looked toward the memorial. You know, I argued against sealing everything. I know. You were angry. I wasn't angry. I was protecting families. The general nodded. You always were. He reached into his coat. A sealed envelope. No return address. No markings. What's this? Insurance. If tomorrow goes badly, open it. I accepted the envelope. I hope I never have to. So do I. As he walked away, he stopped without turning around. Ray? Yes? When the courtroom asks who you are, for once, tell them. Then he disappeared into the darkness. The hearing began 2 days later. County courthouse, small courtroom, nothing dramatic, just another civil dispute, on the schedule. Emily sat beside me. Margaret organized her files. Across the aisle, Derek smiled confidently. His attorney looked relaxed, like a man expecting an easy victory. The bailiff called the room to order. Everyone stood. The judge entered. Not the judge from the opening scene. A local family court judge. Routine. Professional. He reviewed the paperwork, then frowned. This case has just been transferred. The courtroom looked confused. Margaret stood. Transferred. The judge nodded. Federal jurisdiction. Gasps echoed through the room. Even Derek looked surprised. His attorney immediately objected. On what grounds? The judge adjusted his glasses. I've been instructed not to discuss that. He looked toward me, then added quietly, Mr. Caldwell, they're expecting you downtown. Emily stared at me. Dad, what is happening? I looked out the courthouse window. Black government SUVs were pulling into the parking lot, one after another. No sirens, no flashing lights, just quiet precision. I had seen movements like that before, years ago, in places that never appeared on any map. I took a slow breath, then looked at my daughter. It seems the past has decided to testify. The federal courthouse was unlike any courtroom I had entered before. Marble floors, high ceilings, United States flags standing perfectly still. The kind of building where every whisper felt louder than a shout. Emily walked beside me. She had barely spoken during the drive. Finally, just before we reached the entrance, she stopped. "Dad?" I turned. "I'm scared." I placed a hand gently on her shoulder. "I know. What if we lose?" I smiled softly. "Then we'll lose honestly. And if we win, we'll still go home the same people." Television cameras waited outside. Microphones, reporters, photographers. They weren't there for a simple custody dispute. Someone had leaked the story. As we climbed the courthouse steps, flashbulbs exploded around us. "Mr. Caldwell, did you serve in classified operations? Is it true Washington intervened? Are you connected to a federal investigation?" I answered none of them. Silence had protected people before. It still could. Inside, Margaret hurried toward us. "You've seen the news?" "No." She handed me her phone. The headline filled the screen. "Local property dispute moved to federal court, under sealed authority below it." My photograph. 28 years old, Marine uniform, most of the ribbons blurred by the newspaper. Emily stared. "Dad, where did they get that picture?" "I don't know, but deep down, I already did." Someone had opened an old file. Across the hallway, Derek arrived. Designer suit, perfect smile. His attorney walked confidently beside him. The moment Derek saw us, he laughed, loud enough for everyone nearby to hear. "So, this is the great war hero?" Several reporters turned toward us. Derek shrugged dramatically. "I've looked him up. 30 years pretending to be somebody important. He retired with nothing. My wife and I worked for everything we own." Emily's face reddened. I touched her arm. "Leave it." "But Dad." "Leave it." Derek stepped closer. "You know what your problem is, old man? You think people still care about uniforms. They don't. This isn't the military. This is real life." I looked directly into his eyes. "No, this is character." His smile disappeared. The courtroom doors opened. Bailiff calling. Everyone moved inside. The room filled quickly. Lawyers, observers, journalists, even military correspondents sat quietly near the back. Margaret leaned toward me. "This isn't normal." "I know," Emily whispered. "Why are military reporters here?" "I don't know." It wasn't entirely true. I had a suspicion, but suspicions weren't evidence. The proceedings began. The federal judge had not yet entered. Instead, court officers organized files. People took their seats. The atmosphere felt unusually tense, almost expectant. Derek's attorney stood first. He smiled confidently. "Your Honor, before proceedings begin, my client wishes to address several statements circulating in the media." The courtroom clerk nodded. "Proceed." He pointed toward me. "My client's former father-in-law has spent years allowing people to believe he was some kind of decorated military hero. He is not. He is simply another retired Marine. Nothing more." Several people nodded. One reporter typed quickly. Emily clenched her fists. Then, Derek stood. He straightened his expensive tie, looked directly toward the bench, then toward the reporters, finally toward me. He smiled. "Ladies and gentlemen, I've listened to this man tell stories for years. But today, the truth matters." He pointed directly at me. "He's just another washed-up veteran." The room grew quieter. Encouraged, Derek continued. "He spent 30 years pretending to be important. He never accomplished anything that mattered. My wife spent her childhood believing her father was some kind of hero. He wasn't. He was just lucky enough to wear a uniform. A few people chuckled. Emily looked ready to stand. I quietly placed my hand over hers. No. Then, another voice echoed across the courtroom. Cold, sharp, female. It was my ex-wife, Elaine. She had remained silent until now. She slowly stood, looked directly toward the empty judge's bench, then toward the reporters, and smiled. My ex-husband built his entire life around stories. He always wanted people to believe he was important, but he's just another worthless Marine. A few scattered laughs spread through the gallery. Even Derek's attorney smiled. Emily lowered her head. I simply sat quietly, hands folded, expression unchanged, because I recognized something no one else had noticed. The courtroom doors behind the bench had opened. The bailiff stepped forward. All rise. Every person stood. Silence settled over the room. The new federal judge entered. Tall, silver hair, measured steps. His expression remained perfectly neutral, until he looked toward my table. His eyes met mine. For a single heartbeat, time stopped. He missed one step. Only one. Barely noticeable, but I saw it. So did he. Recognition. Old, deep, instant. His face revealed nothing. Years of discipline prevented that. But his eyes remembered. He reached the bench, placed his files down, adjusted his glasses. The clerk began reading the case number. No one noticed that the judge hadn't taken his eyes off me. Not once. He finally looked down at the documents. Then, back at me. A second longer this time, almost as though confirming something impossible. Emily whispered, "Dad, does he know you?" I answered quietly. "I don't think he's forgotten." The judge opened the case file. He read the first page, then stopped. His hand rested motionless on the paper. The courtroom waited. Several seconds passed, long enough for everyone to notice. Finally, the judge removed his glasses, looked directly at me, and spoke. His voice, calm, professional, but carrying something no one else in the room understood. "Mr. Raymond Caldwell," he paused. "Would you please stand?" I rose slowly. The courtroom watched. No one breathed. The judge continued staring at me, as if 30 years had vanished in an instant. Then, very quietly, almost too quietly to hear, he whispered one sentence, not into the microphone, only toward me. "You haven't changed, sir." The courtroom froze. The courtroom remained completely silent. Every eye moved between me and the judge. Judge Nathaniel Brooks continued looking at me, not as a judge, but as a man searching through 30 years of memory. Then, he slowly composed himself, professional again. He adjusted his robe, opened the case file. "We'll proceed." His voice was steady, but I noticed something almost no one else did. His right hand was trembling, only slightly, only for a second. Derek's attorney stood. "Your Honor, my client appreciates the opportunity to finally put an end to years of intimidation." The judge nodded. "Proceed." The attorney walked toward the center of the courtroom. "Mr. Caldwell has attempted to present himself as someone worthy of public admiration. He has influenced his daughter through exaggerated military stories, while contributing nothing to her adult life." Emily looked down. Every word hurt her. Not because it was true, because she had once believed it. Margaret rose immediately. "Objection. Counsel is making personal attacks." "Sustained." Judge Brooks replied calmly. "Stick to facts." The attorney smiled. "Very well." He lifted several documents. "Mr. Caldwell receives an ordinary military pension. He owns no major business, no public office, no awards recognized by this court." He looked toward the gallery. "In simple terms, he's an ordinary retired Marine." Several reporters nodded. Pens moved quickly. Exactly the headline Derek wanted. Then Derek stood, confident, relaxed, almost amused. He walked a few steps toward me. "Tell them," he smiled. "Tell everyone. What exactly did you accomplish in 30 years? What rank were you? What medals? What missions?" He laughed softly. "You can't. Because there aren't any." The courtroom waited. I remained silent. Elaine folded her arms. "I warned everyone years ago. He always hid behind silence. He wanted mystery, so people would imagine he mattered." She shook her head. "The truth. He was never important." Judge Brooks closed his pen. Very carefully, he looked toward Elaine, then Derek, then back at me. For several long seconds, he said nothing. Finally, he addressed me directly. "Mr. Caldwell, would you answer the question?" I stood, straight, calm, hands behind my back. "I cannot." Derek laughed loudly. "There it is." "I told you," Judge Brooks interrupted. "Mr. Caldwell, you cannot, or you will not." I answered exactly as I had answered questions decades earlier. I gave my word. The courtroom looked confused. Judge Brooks inhaled slowly. His eyes closed, only for a moment. When they opened again, they were no longer simply a judge's eyes. They belonged to a soldier, to a man remembering. He removed his glasses, placed them carefully on the bench. Then, something extraordinary happened. He stood, not because procedure required it, because respect did. The courtroom stared. No judge stands during testimony. Judge Brooks stepped away from the bench. One slow step, then another, until he stood directly in front of it. His voice became softer, far more personal, almost reverent. "Mr. Caldwell?" A pause, one the entire courtroom could feel. Then he straightened his shoulders, raised his right hand, and rendered a perfect Marine salute. Every veteran in the gallery froze. Judge Brooks spoke clearly, loud enough for every camera to capture. "Permission to speak freely, Colonel?" Silence. Absolute silence. No one moved. No one breathed. Emily stared at me. Her lips parted. "Colonel?" Elaine's face lost all color. Derek looked toward his attorney. His smile was gone. The reporters stopped typing. One camera operator whispered, "My God." I held the salute. Just for a moment, then slowly returned it. "Permission granted." Judge Brooks lowered his hand. "I've waited 28 years to say thank you." Gasps echoed through the courtroom. Judge Brooks turned toward the gallery. His voice was calm. "But before this case continues, there is something this court deserves to know." Derek immediately objected. "Your Honor, this has nothing to do with..." Judge Brooks looked at him. One look, enough to silence the room. "It has everything to do with character." He continued. 31 years ago, during an overseas evacuation, our convoy entered an ambush. My commanding officer was Colonel Raymond Caldwell." The courtroom became motionless. He had every opportunity to save himself. He didn't. He stayed behind. He carried wounded Marines, one after another, under enemy fire. 3 men survived that day. I was one of them. Emily covered her mouth. Tears streamed down her face. Judge Brooks looked directly at Derek. "You called him a worthless Marine." His voice hardened. "I owe my life to that Marine." Then he looked at Elaine. "You called him a man who accomplished nothing." He paused. "I became a federal judge because that man gave me the chance to come home." No one spoke. No one could. The courtroom was no longer hearing a custody dispute. It was witnessing the quiet truth of a man who had spent 30 years refusing to speak about his own greatness. No one moved. Not the reporters, not the lawyers, not even the court clerk. The silence inside the courtroom felt heavier than any argument. Judge Brooks remained standing. His eyes never left mine. For a long moment, neither of us spoke. Then, he quietly lowered his salute. I have waited 31 years to thank the man who carried me off that mountain. He turned toward the courtroom. I wasn't supposed to survive. The helicopter had already left. Our communications were gone. We were surrounded. He paused. Colonel Caldwell was ordered to evacuate. He refused. The room remained silent. Judge Brooks continued. He made exactly one radio transmission. His voice softened. No Marine gets left behind. He went back. Again and again and again. He carried wounded men until there was no strength left. Then he smiled sadly. When the final helicopter landed, he boarded last, not first. A reporter slowly lowered his camera. No one wanted to interrupt. Judge Brooks looked toward Derek. You wanted facts. Here are the facts. This man received commendations that remain classified to this day. He declined interviews. He refused publicity. He never wrote a book. He never asked for recognition. He simply went home and became a father. Emily burst into tears. She stood suddenly. Dad, her voice broke. I didn't know. I looked at her gently. I know. No, she whispered. I never even asked. Across the courtroom, Elaine sat frozen. For the first time all morning, she looked genuinely ashamed. She remembered every argument, every insult, every time she had called me distant, every moment she mistook silence for emptiness. Derek finally stood. His confidence had disappeared. He cleared his throat. I didn't know. I looked at him calmly. No, you didn't. He lowered his eyes. I'm sorry. There was no anger left in his voice. Only embarrassment, only regret. Margaret leaned toward me. You've won. I smiled faintly. I wasn't trying to. Judge Brooks returned to the bench. He adjusted his robe once more. His voice became formal again. This court has reviewed the evidence. He looked toward Derek. The allegations against Emily Caldwell are dismissed in their entirety. He signed the order. The restraining request filed against Mr. Lawson is granted. The court further recommends that the district attorney review the evidence of witness intimidation. Derek's attorney closed his briefcase. Without a word, the case was over. People began leaving, but no one rushed. Reporters gathered outside, waiting, expecting statements, expecting headlines, expecting a hero. I gave them none. As I reached the courthouse steps, microphones surrounded me. Colonel Caldwell, will you comment? Why did you hide your service? Do you regret staying silent? I smiled politely, then answered with the only words that mattered. I wasn't raising soldiers. I was raising a daughter. The uniform belonged to my country. The years after it belonged to my family. Then I walked away. Emily caught up with me halfway across the plaza. She wrapped both arms around me, just like she had when she was 6 years old. I'm so sorry. She couldn't stop crying. I thought you were just ordinary. I held her close. So did I. She looked up through her tears. What do you mean? I smiled. The best people usually are. She shook her head. No. You were extraordinary. I touched her cheek. Never confuse what someone has done with who they are. The medals weren't the important part. The important part was coming home. She whispered, "Can you forgive me?" I answered immediately. There was never anything to forgive. A few steps behind us, Judge Brooks stood quietly beside the courthouse doors, watching, not as a judge, as the young lieutenant whose life had once depended on another man's courage. He raised one final salute, not for the cameras, not for the reporters, only for me. I returned it. Then we both lowered our hands. No words were needed. Honor rarely needs them. That evening, Emily came home with me. We made coffee. The same old kitchen, the same wooden table, the same quiet house. She noticed an old photograph hanging beside the hallway. It showed a much younger man, wearing an ordinary Marine uniform. No medals visible, no rank, no ceremony, just a smile. She asked, "Why is this the only military picture you ever kept?" I looked at it for a long moment. Because it's the day after that photograph that I became responsible for other people's sons, and I promised myself, if I ever came home, I'd spend the rest of my life being responsible for my own child. Emily reached across the table. She held my hand. Neither of us spoke. Sometimes healing begins without words. Months later, life returned to normal. No interviews, no television appearances, no book deals. I declined every invitation. Judge Brooks sent one handwritten letter. It contained only one sentence. "The debt I owe can never be repaid, but it can always be honored." I framed it, not because it praised me, because it reminded me that true respect comes from those who were there, not from those who watched later. If this story leaves you with one thought, let it be this: the strongest people are often the quietest. The greatest sacrifices are usually the ones no one applauds. And before you decide someone's worth, make sure you know the story they never felt the need to tell.